Part 1 begins on a cold and quiet evening when the lonely cowboy, Daniel, was returning home after a long day on his ranch. The sun had already gone down, leaving behind a soft orange glow that slowly faded into darkness. Daniel guided his horse along the narrow dirt path, listening only to the wind brushing through the tall grass. He lived far from the town because he liked peace. But sometimes even peace felt heavy when a person had no one to talk to. For years, Daniel had gotten used to silence. No one visited him. No one waited for him, and no one asked how his day had been. Life was simple, but empty. He worked from morning till evening, ate alone, and slept early. It was a routine he never questioned. That night, however, something felt slightly different. The air was colder than usual, as if the wind carried a message he could not understand. As Daniel approached the old barn near the edge of his land, he noticed his horse suddenly stop. The animal lifted its head and turned its ears toward the barn, as if hearing something unusual. Daniel gently patted the horse's neck, thinking it was just reacting to the wind. But then he heard it too, a soft sound, almost like a whisper, but filled with pain. He couldn't recognize it at first. It wasn't an injured animal. It wasn't the sound of something falling. It was a voice. Daniel froze for a moment and listened again. This time, the sound was clearer. A trembling voice cried, I can't take this anymore." The words were full of sadness. So much sadness that they made Daniel feel a sharp pinch inside his chest. He had heard people in pain before. But this voice was different. It sounded young, tired, and desperate, like someone who had reached their breaking point. Without wasting a second, Daniel stepped off his horse and walked toward the barn. His boots brushed against dry leaves, and every step felt heavier because he didn't know what he would find. He was not the type who ignored someone in trouble. Even though he lived alone, he carried a quiet sense of responsibility, the kind that made him act without thinking twice. When he reached the corner of the barn, he stopped again as the voice whispered another painful sob. Daniel slowly peeked behind the barn wall, and what he saw made him forget the cold completely. A young woman sat on the ground, hugging her knees tightly against her chest. Her clothes were covered in dust, her hair messy, and her eyes swollen as if she had been crying for a long time. Her hands trembled every few seconds, and her breathing was unsteady, like someone who had run for miles. She didn't notice Daniel at first because her head was down, and she was lost in her own struggle. Daniel took a gentle step forward and spoke in a calm voice. "Miss, are you all right?" His voice was steady but filled with concern, the kind that easily reached people who needed comfort. The woman flinched and looked up quickly, fear flashing in her eyes. She backed away a little, not because Daniel looked dangerous, but because she had clearly been through something difficult. Daniel raised his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're on my ranch. I heard you crying. Do you need help?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Her lips moved slightly, but no words came out. Daniel noticed she was shivering in the cold night air. Her thin jacket was no match for the freezing wind. He slowly removed his coat and gently placed it near her without trying to touch her. "You don't have to say anything right now," he added quietly. "Just take the coat. You're freezing." The woman stared at the coat, and then at him. She finally reached out with shaky hands and pulled it closer around her shoulders. As soon as she felt the warmth, her eyes filled with fresh tears. But these tears were different. They were softer, like she finally felt a little safe. Daniel crouched down a few feet away from her so she wouldn't feel trapped. "Can you tell me your name?" he asked, keeping his tone gentle. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and whispered, "Emily." Her voice cracked, but at least she spoke. "All right, Emily," Daniel replied. "I'm Daniel. You don't look okay. You shouldn't be out here in the cold. Do you have anywhere to go?" Emily shook her head slowly. "No, I don't," she whispered. Her whole body trembled. not just from the cold but from the weight of whatever she had been carrying inside her heart. Daniel didn't push her for more information. He understood that forcing someone to explain their pain only made things worse. Instead, he spoke with kindness. "Would you like to come inside? Just to warm up. You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to. But you shouldn't stay out here like this. If you one of them, absurd. If you not content, one see." Emily looked at him again. This time her eyes showed confusion mixed with fear and a tiny bit of hope. She hesitated, but her body clearly needed help. After a few seconds, she nodded very slowly. Daniel stood up and offered his hand, not too close, not too demanding, just enough to let her know she had support if she wanted it. Emily stared at his hand, took a deep breath, and finally placed her hand in his. Her fingers were cold, and Daniel felt her shaking even more when she tried to stand. He helped her up carefully, making sure she didn't slip. They walked toward the ranch house together. Emily walked slowly, as if every step took effort. Daniel didn't rush her. He matched her pace, letting her know she wasn't alone anymore. The ranch house wasn't fancy, but it was warm and safe. Daniel opened the door and stepped aside to let her enter. Emily paused at the doorway, taking a moment as though she needed courage to cross into a place that offered comfort she hadn't felt for a long time. Then she stepped inside quietly. Daniel closed the door gently, lit a lamp, and invited her to sit near the small fireplace. He boiled water for tea and handed her a warm cup. Emily held it tightly with both hands, letting the heat spread into her fingers. She didn't speak for a long time. Daniel didn't ask anything. He just sat nearby, giving her quiet company. After a few minutes, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You're not causing any trouble," Daniel said softly. "Everyone needs help sometimes." Emily looked down, and her voice trembled as she spoke again. I didn't know where else to go." Daniel shook his head gently. "You're safe here. That's what matters right now." For the first time since he found her crying behind the barn, Emily's shoulders relaxed slightly. She wasn't okay yet, but she was no longer alone. Daniel couldn't explain it, but something inside him felt different too. A woman he had never met before had appeared on the saddest night of her life, and somehow her presence had broken through his long, silent loneliness. Neither of them knew it yet, but that night was the beginning of a change neither had expected. A cold, painful cry had brought two lonely hearts together on a quiet ranch, and nothing would be the same again. When Emily woke up the next morning, she didn't understand where she was at first. The room was small but clean, lit by soft morning sunlight that slipped through the curtains. For a moment, she panicked, wondering if she had made a mistake by trusting a stranger. But then the memories of the night before returned her tears. The cold ground behind the barn, Daniel's calm voice, and the warmth of the coat he had given her. She took a long breath and sat up slowly. The bed she slept on was simple, but she felt safer than she had felt in a long time. Outside the room, Daniel was already awake. He had been up since sunrise, feeding the horses and preparing breakfast. He didn't want to disturb her, knowing she needed rest. When he heard soft footsteps behind him, he turned and saw Emily standing by the kitchen doorway. She looked shy, almost afraid to enter. Daniel gave her a gentle nod. "Good morning," he said in a warm tone. "I hope you slept well." Emily nodded slowly and stepped inside. She held her hands together, unsure of what to say or do. She wasn't used to being treated kindly, and it showed in the way she moved carefully, as if expecting something bad to happen at any moment. Daniel sensed her uneasiness and tried to give her space. He placed a plate of warm food on the table and said, "You can eat. I made enough." Emily hesitated for a moment before sitting down. She took small bites at first, as though checking if she was allowed. Daniel didn't look directly at her. He simply cleaned up the counter, letting her eat without feeling watched. After a few minutes, Emily whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was still soft, but a little steadier. "You don't need to thank me," Daniel said. "Anyone would have helped." But Emily shook her head. "No. Not everyone helps. Not everyone listens." Her words told Daniel more than she realized. He didn't ask further. People with heavy hearts often spoke in small pieces, letting out only what they felt safe enough to share. When she finished breakfast, Emily stood up as if unsure what to do next. Daniel wiped his hands on a cloth and looked at her kindly. "If you want," he said gently, "you can stay here until you figure things out. I won't ask anything you aren't ready to talk about." Emily's eyes widened a little. She didn't expect such an offer. "But I don't want to be a problem." "You're not," Daniel replied. "There's plenty of space here." There was a long pause before Emily nodded. She felt something she hadn't felt in months: permission to breathe. The day passed slowly but comfortably. Daniel worked outside, repairing the fence near the north field. Emily stayed inside at first, looking out the window, thinking about the life she had run from. She didn't want to return to it. She didn't want to go back to fear, sadness, or loneliness. But she also didn't know what direction her life would take now. After an hour of sitting in silence, she finally stepped outside. Daniel heard her footsteps on the porch and looked up from his work. She stood there awkwardly, holding the coat he had given her. "Do you need help with something?" she asked, almost whispering. Daniel gave her a small smile. "Only if you want to. You don't have to do anything." "Too." Emily shook her head. "I want to help. I don't want to sit inside doing nothing." Daniel pointed toward a bucket of nails and a few wooden planks. "If you hand me those when I need them, that'll be more than enough." Emily nodded and came closer. At first, she was quiet, only passing him tools when he asked. But slowly, the silence between them turned peaceful, not uncomfortable. Daniel worked carefully, and every now and then, he explained what he was doing, not to teach her, but just to make her feel included. Emily listened and even smiled once when Daniel accidentally dropped a nail and pretended it didn't happen. For the first time in a long time, she felt a faint warmth in her chest. Later in the afternoon, a small gust of wind blew Emily's hair across her face. She brushed it away and said softly, "I'm sorry if I came at a bad time." "Yesterday." Daniel looked at her for a moment. "There's no such thing as a bad time when someone needs help," he said. "You were hurting. I'm glad you found the ranch instead of wandering alone." Emily lowered her gaze. "I didn't know where I was going. I just walked until my legs gave up." "That happens," Daniel replied. "Sometimes you don't need a destination. You just need to leave." His words surprised her. It was like he understood her without needing details. She wondered what loneliness he carried, what losses had shaped him, and why he lived all alone on this large ranch. But she didn't ask. She didn't want to open wounds for him, especially when he hadn't asked about hers. In the evening, the sky turned orange and quiet. Emily stood at the fence, watching the horses grazing peacefully. She whispered, "I used to love quiet mornings and evenings, but then life became too loud inside my head." Chapter, chapter, chapter. Daniel was a few feet away, placing tools back in a box. He heard her words but didn't interrupt. Sometimes letting people talk to the sky was the best way to help them heal. After a while, he walked over and stood beside her. They both watched the horses, in silence. After a few minutes, Daniel spoke softly. "If you want to talk one day, I'll listen. No rush. No pressure." Emily turned her head slightly and studied his face. There was no judgment in his eyes, no curiosity born from gossip. He simply cared. And that made her feel safe. "I just had too much going on," she said slowly. "I kept holding everything inside, and one day, it felt like I would break if I stayed. Daniel nodded. Sometimes, leaving is the only way to protect yourself. Emily took a shaky breath. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know who would care. Daniel replied, You found someone who does. Emily felt her chest tighten, not in pain, but in a way that told her she wasn't alone anymore. She looked up at the vast sky and felt as if the world wasn't pressing down on her so heavily anymore. Maybe it wasn't luck that brought her to the ranch. Maybe it was something else, something she didn't understand yet. When night fell, Daniel made a simple dinner, and they ate together. Emily was still shy, but she laughed once when Daniel made a quiet joke about almost burning the bread. That single laugh felt like the beginning of a new chapter. After dinner, she washed the dishes, even though Daniel told her she didn't need to. It made her feel useful, grounded, and part of something again. Before going to sleep, Emily stopped near the hallway and turned toward Daniel. Thank you for letting me stay, even though you didn't know me. Daniel nodded gently. Sometimes, strangers help where others don't. Emily nodded back, her eyes softer than before. Good night. Good night, Daniel replied. As she walked back to her room, she felt a strange feeling, a mix of comfort, safety, and quiet hope. She hadn't felt any of these things in a long time. She wrapped herself in the blanket, closed her eyes, and let herself rest. Outside, Daniel sat by the fireplace, thinking about how easily their quiet lives had crossed. He didn't understand why, but he felt responsible for her now, not because she was weak, but because she had reached him in a way he hadn't expected. The ranch felt different that night, warmer, calmer, and no longer filled with silence. Two lonely people had started to find strength in each other, without even realizing it. The next few days on the ranch passed quietly, but something gentle began forming between Daniel and Emily, something they both felt but didn't speak about. Each morning, Daniel woke up early for chores, expecting Emily to stay inside and rest. But every morning, he found her already awake, sitting on the porch with a warm cup of tea he had left for her. She always greeted him with a small, shy smile, and even though her eyes still carried sadness, there was a softness growing in them. Emily tried to help as much as she could. At first, she only swept the porch or folded blankets. But soon she offered to do more. She helped Daniel feed the horses, carried buckets of water, and even learned how to gather eggs from the hens. She wasn't used to ranch life, but she tried with a quiet determination that surprised Daniel. He could see she wanted to be useful, not a burden. One morning, while Daniel repaired part of the barn roof, he heard Emily laughing softly as one of the horses sniffed her pockets, searching for treats she didn't have. Her laugh was warm, gentle, and real. Nothing like the broken voice he had heard the night he found her. Daniel paused and watched her from a distance. He realized he hadn't heard laughter in the ranch for years. It changed the air. It changed him. Later that day, Emily noticed him watching and looked embarrassed. Sorry, she said, brushing her hair back. I didn't know she would come so close. Daniel smiled. Horses like people who talk softly. She trusts you. Emily looked down with a small blush. I didn't know animals could feel that. Daniel replied, They feel more than we think, sometimes more than people. Emily understood those words more deeply than she wanted to. She stood beside him as he hammered the last nail into the roof board. After a moment, she said, I think I was losing myself before I came here. Daniel didn't ask for details. He only listened. Emily continued slowly. Every day felt heavier. I would wake up tired, go through the day tired, and then end the night crying. I didn't know how to escape it. Daniel lowered the hammer and sat on the step beside the barn. Emily sat next to him, leaving a polite space between them. He finally spoke in a calm voice. You're safe here. You don't have to carry everything alone anymore. Emily's eyes filled slightly, but she didn't cry. She took a slow breath and nodded. She appreciated that Daniel never pushed her to say more, never forced questions on her, and never judged her silences. That alone was healing her more than she realized. As days turned into a week, their routine settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emily cooked breakfast while Daniel fed the animals. They worked in the fields together, sometimes talking, sometimes simply sharing the quiet. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn orange and then fade into purple. Emily began to share small pieces of her past. She didn't tell everything. Only little things, like how she used to enjoy reading, how she loved the calm of rain, how she felt lonely, even when surrounded by people. Daniel listened without interrupting, without trying to fix things. Sometimes, she spoke only a few words, sometimes a sentence, but each one was a step toward healing. One afternoon, a light wind passed through the ranch, and Emily was cleaning the kitchen while Daniel split firewood outside. As she wiped the table, she noticed a small, framed picture on the shelf. It showed Daniel with two older people, his parents. They were smiling proudly, and Daniel looked younger, happier. Emily picked up the frame gently, wondering about the life he had before. Daniel stepped inside just then, carrying firewood, and noticed her looking at the picture. He paused, but instead of pulling away, he walked closer. Emily placed the frame back carefully. "They look kind," she said softly. "They were," Daniel replied. His voice carried a quiet sadness. "They passed away years ago. After that, the ranch felt empty." Emily felt the pain behind his simple words. She understood loneliness too well. She didn't speak. She only looked at him with quiet sympathy. Daniel appreciated that she didn't offer empty words. Instead, she understood the weight of silence. In the evening, Emily helped him prepare dinner. They moved around the kitchen like they had done it for years, even though it had only been days. Something about their teamwork felt natural. When she chopped vegetables, Daniel heated the pot. When she stirred, he placed plates on the table. Their hands brushed once, and both paused. Neither looked away quickly. They simply smiled shyly and continued. It was a small moment, but it meant much more. Later, after dinner, Daniel stepped outside to check the horses, and Emily followed quietly. The night sky was filled with stars, more than she had ever seen before. Living away from town meant the sky was untouched by streetlights. Everything looked bright and peaceful. Emily whispered, "It's beautiful." Daniel nodded. "This is why I stayed here. Even when life hurt, the sky always stayed the same." Emily looked at him, admiring how calm he was. She wondered how he managed to stay strong through loneliness and loss. Daniel noticed her gaze and gave a gentle smile. "You can sit with me," he said. They sat on a wooden bench near the horses. The silence between them was warm. Emily closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. She hadn't felt this calm in years. After a long pause, she spoke in a soft voice. "I used to believe I would never find a place where I could rest." Daniel looked at her, but didn't interrupt. "But here," she continued, "it feels different. I feel like I can breathe here." Daniel's heart softened at her words. He wanted to say he felt the same, that her presence filled something in him that had been empty for too long. But he didn't say it aloud. Instead, he said, "I'm glad you're here." Emily's eyes softened. She looked down shyly but smiled. "I'm glad too." The quiet night carried their soft words, and the gentle wind brushed against them. They stayed outside for a long time, not speaking much but sharing a peaceful silence that brought them closer in ways words couldn't. When they finally went back indoors, Emily paused at her bedroom door. She turned to Daniel and said, "Today was one of the first days in a long time where I didn't feel heavy." Daniel felt something warm spread through his chest. "Good," he said softly. You deserve peace. Emily nodded and whispered, "Thank you. For everything." Daniel replied, "Anytime." She went into her room, and Daniel stood alone in the hallway, feeling a strange mix of hope and fear. He had lived alone for so long that he didn't know what it meant to care for someone again. But Emily had walked into his life like a quiet, fragile storm that softened every corner of his heart. That night, neither of them slept quickly. Emily lay awake thinking about how safe she felt. Daniel sat by the fireplace, thinking about how different the ranch felt now. Both of them, without speaking, had begun to heal each other's loneliness, one day at a time. The storm arrived without warning. Clouds gathered quickly over the ranch, turning the sky dark long before sunset. Daniel noticed the change while he was feeding the horses. The wind picked up, dust rising in swirls across the yard. He looked toward the house and saw Emily standing by the kitchen window, watching the sky with worry deep in her eyes. Storms were normal in that part of the land, but something about this one frightened her. When Daniel stepped inside, he found her trying to steady her hands as she placed cups back on the shelf. She was pretending to stay calm, but her breathing gave away her fear. "You all right?" Daniel asked gently, as he closed the door behind him. Emily nodded quickly. But the movement was too fast, too forced. "I'm fine," she whispered. Daniel didn't believe her, not because she was lying, but because he had seen fear before in animals, in friends, and even in himself. He walked closer and spoke softly. "Storms don't last long here. It'll pass." A loud crack of thunder shook the house, and Emily flinched so hard she nearly dropped the cup in her hand. Her eyes filled with panic, her breath coming out in short bursts. Daniel stepped forward quickly and took the cup from her trembling fingers before it fell. "It's okay," he said again, even softer. "You're safe." Emily covered her ears for a moment, trying to block the next rumble. Her body trembled, like she was fighting memories she didn't want to face. Daniel didn't know what storms reminded her of, but he could tell they weren't simple memories. They were the kind that stayed buried until something forced them out. He guided her to the small couch near the fireplace and sat beside her, not close enough to overwhelm her, but close enough to let her know she wasn't alone. Rain started hitting the roof hard, and another thunderclap echoed through the valley. Emily grabbed the edge of her sweater tightly, her shoulders rising with every deep breath. Daniel watched her carefully. He didn't ask questions. He didn't want to push her. Instead, he spoke in a calm, steady tone. "Storms seem loud, but the house is strong. Nothing will happen to us." Emily squeezed her eyes shut as another flash lit up the window. She whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "I hate storms. I always have." Daniel turned his body slightly toward her. "Do they remind you of something bad?" Emily nodded slowly. "Lightning, thunder, loud noises. They make me feel like I'm back in a place I never want to remember." Her breath shook as she spoke. "Whenever storms hit, everything inside me freezes. I feel small again, like I can't protect myself." Daniel kept his voice calm and warm. "You don't have to face it alone this time." Emily opened her eyes, and for the first time, tears began to fall without her trying to stop them. She wasn't sobbing, just letting them run freely. She didn't need to hold them in anymore. Being on the ranch, being near Daniel, made her feel safe enough to release the weight she carried. Daniel reached toward a blanket draped on the back of the couch and laid it gently around her shoulders. "You're safe now," he repeated, the way someone would speak to a frightened child or a scared horse. "I'm right here." Emily pulled the blanket tighter and breathed slowly. The storm continued outside, growing stronger. The wind pushed against the walls, and the roof creaked. Daniel stayed beside her, his presence quiet but strong. After a long moment, Emily whispered, "Why are you being so kind to me?" Daniel looked at her with soft eyes. "Because everyone deserves kindness when they're hurting. You walked into this ranch on one of the hardest nights of your life. And you've been trying to stand on your feet again. Every day since. That takes strength. Emily shook her head weakly. I don't feel strong. Strength isn't about never falling, Daniel said. It's about standing up again, even when your heart feels heavy. His words made Emily's tears fall faster. But this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of release, of letting go. She leaned slightly forward, not to hide her face, but because her body finally stopped fighting itself. She wasn't expecting comfort, and she wasn't trying to earn it. She was simply letting her guard down. The thunder softened for a moment, giving the room a small pocket of calm. Emily wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. I never had anyone to talk to like this, she murmured. Whenever I was scared, people told me to forget it, to just deal with it, so I stopped telling anyone. Daniel shook his head gently. That's not how fear works. You can't just force it away. Emily turned her face toward him slightly. Then how do you get rid of it? You don't get rid of it. Emily stared at him, and her eyes softened. For the first time, she felt like she wasn't facing her memories alone. The storm outside didn't seem as terrifying anymore. It was still loud, still strong, but it wasn't stronger than the calm Daniel brought into the room. Hours passed slowly. The storm raged on, but Emily didn't panic as much. She focused on Daniel's steady breathing, his calm presence. Sometimes she talked, sometimes she sat quietly, but every moment she felt safer than she had in years. Later in the night, as the storm began to weaken, Emily whispered something that took Daniel by surprise. I don't think I want to leave here. Daniel didn't rush to answer. He didn't want to misread her words. You mean the ranch? Emily nodded. Yes. I know I've only been here a short time, but this place feels like the only place where my heart doesn't feel heavy. You've been kinder to me than anyone has in years. Daniel took a slow breath, his chest warming at her words. This ranch was always quiet and cold. But since you came, it's been different. Better. Emily's face softened even more. You mean that? I do, Daniel said honestly. Another soft rumble of thunder passed, but this time Emily didn't flinch. She looked at Daniel with tired but peaceful eyes. I don't want to be a burden, she whispered. You aren't, Daniel responded gently. You're someone who needed help, and you're someone who brings light into this place. You're not a burden, Emily. Not at all. Emily took a deep breath. The first steady one since the storm began. The fear inside her finally loosened its hold. She felt safe, supported, and no longer ashamed of her emotions. Daniel hadn't judged her once. He had only offered warmth when she was cold, calm when she was scared, and understanding when she was lost. As the storm finally faded into light rain, Emily leaned her head gently to one side, not touching Daniel, but close enough to show she trusted him. Daniel stayed still, giving her all the space she needed. The house felt warm, almost glowing with comfort. That night changed something deep inside both of them. Emily realized she didn't have to run anymore. She didn't have to cry alone. Daniel realized that his loneliness wasn't an unchangeable part of his life. He had opened his heart to a stranger, and in return, she had brought warmth he didn't know he was missing. When Emily finally fell asleep on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, Daniel carefully placed a pillow under her head and made sure she was comfortable. He watched the soft rise and fall of her breathing and felt something gentle and protective bloom in his chest. The storm was gone, but the night had changed everything. Two lonely souls had found strength in each other's presence, and neither of them would ever forget it. The morning after the storm, the ranch looked fresh and calm. Drops of rain still clung to the wooden fence, and the fields smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Daniel stepped outside early to check the animals, but the peaceful sight made him pause. For the first time, he felt that the ranch didn't belong to him alone anymore. Something had changed, something soft and bright. Inside the house, Emily slowly woke up. She had fallen asleep on the couch while the storm still rumbled far away. Now she opened her eyes to warm sunlight touching her face. For a moment, she didn't remember falling asleep there. Then she saw the blanket around her shoulders and the pillow Daniel had placed under her head. She understood instantly that he had stayed nearby, making sure she was safe. She sat up slowly, feeling lighter than she had in a long time. Her heart didn't feel tight. Her mind wasn't filled with fear. She breathed deeply, letting the calm morning settle inside her. She heard the soft sound of footsteps outside and knew Daniel was working already. Emily stood and walked quietly to the porch. Daniel was giving hay to the horses, talking to them in his calm voice. She watched him for a few moments. His movements were steady, gentle, and caring. He didn't know she was watching, but she could see something in him that she hadn't noticed before. He wasn't just a lonely cowboy anymore. He was someone who had opened his life to her, without hesitation. Daniel finally noticed her standing in the doorway. He smiled softly. "Morning," he said. Emily stepped outside, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Good morning," she replied. Her voice sounded stronger, steadier. "Did you sleep well?" Daniel asked. She nodded. "Better than I have in months." Daniel smiled again, a smile that warmed his eyes. "Good. I'm glad." Emily walked closer to the fence, watching the horses. The sky was bright blue, and the storm felt far away now. She leaned on the fence and said quietly, "I didn't think I would ever feel peaceful again. But here, I feel like I can finally breathe. Maf, I, Maf, I, did, I. Daniel didn't speak at first. Instead, he rested his arms on the fence beside her. They stood side by side, listening to the horses munching on hay, the birds singing after the rain, and the soft wind moving across the grass. After a moment, Daniel finally asked, "Do you know what you want to do next? I mean, for your life?" Emily took a slow breath. For the first time in many weeks, she wasn't scared of the question. She didn't turn away. She didn't panic. Instead, she looked at Daniel and said, "I don't want to leave." Daniel looked surprised, but not in a bad way. "Are you sure?" he asked carefully. "You don't have to decide because of the storm or what happened last night." Emily shook her head gently. "No, it's not just because of the storm. It's everything. The peaceful mornings, the quiet evenings, the kindness you show without asking anything back. The way this place feels safe. I've never felt that before. I don't want to go back to the life I had before. I want to stay, if you'll let me." Daniel took in her words slowly. He didn't want to say the wrong thing. He didn't want to give her pressure or make her feel trapped. But his heart felt full in a way he couldn't ignore. He had been living alone for years, carrying silence and memories that never went away. But Emily's presence had changed everything. The ranch wasn't lonely anymore. It felt alive. "You can stay," he said finally, his voice warm and sure. "As long as you want." Emily smiled, and her eyes shined softly. She looked out over the field, imagining a life here. A life without fear, without running, without heavy sadness. A life where she could wake up and feel safe. They walked back to the house together. Emily fixed breakfast while Daniel made coffee. They moved around the kitchen like a small team, helping each other without even having to speak. Daniel cooked the eggs while Emily set the plates. She reached for the salt at the same time Daniel did, and their hands brushed. They both paused, but neither pulled away quickly. They simply smiled, a quiet understanding passing between them. After breakfast, they cleaned the dishes together. Emily hummed softly, something she hadn't done in a long time. Daniel watched her, with gentle eyes. He couldn't remember the last time the house felt this warm. Later, they walked around the ranch. Emily helped Daniel check the fences, pick vegetables from the garden, and wash the tools. Every moment felt natural, like they had been doing it for years. Emily laughed when a horse tried to steal a carrot from her pocket. And Daniel laughed too, something he didn't do often. In the afternoon, they sat on the porch to rest. The sun warmed their skin, and the wind carried the fresh smell of rain-soaked grass. Emily leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. Daniel glanced at her and saw something new, a sense of peace on her face. "You look happier," he said softly. Emily opened her eyes and looked at him. "I am," she said. "I didn't think happiness was something I could feel again, but I feel it here." Daniel felt something warm spread through his chest. He looked out at the fields and said, "You brought something here." "Too." Emily tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" "This ranch was lonely," Daniel replied honestly. "I was lonely. I didn't even realize how heavy the silence was until you came. You filled the house with light. You made the days feel alive again." "We?" Emily's breath caught for a moment. No one had ever told her something so kind, something so honest. She looked at Daniel with soft, grateful eyes. "I'm glad I came here," she whispered. "I think maybe I was meant to find this place." Daniel nodded. "Maybe we were meant to find each other." Emily looked down, but a small smile touched her lips. She felt safe, understood, and cared for things she had long thought were impossible. As the day went on, they finished their chores, shared stories, and sat together as the sun slowly dipped behind the hills. Evening painted the sky with soft colors, and Emily felt her heart relax in a way she had never felt before. Before going inside, Emily turned to Daniel and said gently, "Thank you for giving me a place to stay, and for giving me a chance to feel alive again." Daniel looked at her with quiet warmth. "Thank you for choosing to stay." That night, the ranch was calm. No storm, no fear, no heavy thoughts. The house felt like a home again. Emily didn't cry herself to sleep. Daniel didn't sit alone, staring at the fire. Their lives had quietly woven together, turning loneliness into comfort, fear into calm, and sorrow into hope. The night when Emily cried behind the barn had been the darkest moment of her life. But that same night became the turning point that changed everything for her and for the lonely cowboy who found her. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing. They were no longer walking through life alone.